Welcome to the Startup Grind.
So I want to thank all of you for coming. This is our third Startup Grind event in Austin, and we are very lucky to have Hugh Forrest with us today, who, as fame precedes him, he is the director of the South by Southwest Interactive Festival. For those of you who are here for the first time, Startup Grind is an international organization started in the Bay Area by a man named Derek Anderson. He has a long history in tech, started a tech company, and found out that it was really hard. And he started, sort of understating it a bit, he started meeting with some other people he knew who had started tech companies once a month, and they started inviting people to come who they considered to be more knowledgeable and experienced. And out of that grew this event called Startup Grind that is now in 20 cities. 9 cities launched this month, including, there's now one in Singapore, there's one in Sydney, there's one in Utah. So Austin's old hat now. But the goal of this is to come to meet other entrepreneurs, to be inspired by them. It's a little bit different than other startup events that you're going to go to because, one, it's a little bit more intimate. The people that you're meeting are all sort of going through the same thing, and it's about supporting and encouraging each other rather than pitching to one another or networking to find jobs or things like that. So it's a little bit different. I'm very excited to announce that our next event will be November 5th. We will be at Capital Factory's new space downtown, which is on the 16th floor of the Omni building, but not the hotel side. If you don't make that mistake, I made that once, and that floor is actually under construction. Not good. So, and I will be interviewing Joshua Bear, who is one of the founders of Capital Factory and very, very busy in the Austin startup scene. So if you can put that on your calendars for November 5th. And so, although you all have probably heard of Hugh before, you may not know he runs the South by Southwest Interactive Festival. He's been with South by Southwest since before there was an interactive festival, and we'll talk a little bit about that. He is actually from Austin, which I bet I certainly don't qualify in that. Most people I meet don't qualify in that. He went to high school at Austin High and then went to college in Ohio and found his way back to Austin. And so we're going to start there. When I found out that he went to Austin High in the 80s, I don't know how many of you have seen Dazed and Confused, but it's supposed to have been set at Austin High in the 70s. So yeah, I said, was it really like that? Was, is the hazing and the taking the freshmen over, the incoming freshmen, and terrorizing them in the parking lot, did that sort of thing really happen?
Absolutely.
Excellent.
No, when I went to O. Henry Junior High School and went from O. Henry to Austin High in 1977. And at that point, this tradition had been largely phased out, but even 2 or 3 years before, it was fairly active, where 8th grade boys going to Austin High would be shaved by upperclassmen. They would be tackled at some point over the summer. They would hold them down. They would, shave all their hair off, and figure the 70s, everyone had much longer hair than we do now, so it was kind of much more noticeable. There wasn't the style of wearing short hair as there is now. If Dazed and Confused was based in Austin and had some kind of, based on what was going on at Austin High, that would be the tie-in. By the time I was there, graduating from O. Henry to Austin High, I think only 3 or 4 of my classmates were shaved, and at that point, there were so few people doing it that it was somewhat of a badge of honor to get this, but at the same time, either the school district or the state had put in some kind of ruling that if you got shaved, you were suspended for school for 2 weeks. The people who suspended you were, the people who shaved you were suspended for 2 weeks. So effectively, the thing was that tradition was stamped out by the late 70s.
Seems a little harsh to suspend someone as a victim, but they'd be shocked now because
it was a huge problem in Austin in the 70s.
as commemorized forever.
We
Dazed and
eradicated
Confused.
that problem and moved on to bigger and better things.
That's right. So you went from Austin to Ohio. You studied English at Kenyon College, and did you like that? Did you enjoy being in Ohio? It must have been, perhaps, I imagine it's
a
different.
lot like this, a lot more often. Lots of rain. I went to, one of the main reasons I went to Kenyon was I got recruited there to play basketball. It was Division III, and when I was 18 and didn't think I was going to play basketball in college, being recruited to play Division III basketball seemed like a fun thing. So I played 4 years of basketball there, and got what I think is a very solid liberal arts education. Was an English major, then came back to Austin and put that English major talent to good use by delivering newspapers for the Statesman for several years. There you go.
Did you want to be in journalism? Was that not perhaps in the time?
I was looking for an
A little more
entry-level position.
actively.
Looking for an entry-level position, and I certainly found it. My freshman year roommate at Kenyon, he and I had helped start a newspaper at Kenyon, a second newspaper that was a quote alternative to what the official newspaper was. So from doing that for a couple of years, I had this great idea that, hey, I know what I'm doing. I could do this in Austin. So I came back. When I came back to Austin, was publishing something called the Austin Challenger for about 3 years. This was a alternative newspaper, mainly alternative because it never quite came out when it was supposed to come out. So it kind of had an alternative publishing schedule. But I would, work on that during the day, then get up at 4 o'clock in the morning, throw newspapers for 2 hours. That would kind of provide cash flow, eat ramen and peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, and did that for a couple of years. And
I think a bunch of entrepreneurs can relate to
yes,
that.
yes.
So at that point in Austin, was it pretty much just the Statesman? I mean, we're talking pre-Chronicle.
No. The Chronicle had already
there.
started. That point was almost, you could say, the heyday of print in Austin. The Chronicle had started. The Chronicle at that point was published every 2 weeks. There was also a publication called Third Coast, which was a monthly publication, which was very, very good, but they had published on a very thick paper, so they had some pretty high operating costs, I presume, didn't last very long. I got to know the people at the Chronicle. We were kind of friendly competitors. I don't see how I was any kind of threat to them, and that was my initial entree, knowing those folks into South by Southwest.
Yes. Well, and so how you started working for South by Southwest sort of in the very early days of South by Southwest in the 80s, and so through the Chronicle folks you got introduced. Was this again a thought of I'm going to get engaged in this and see where it goes, or did you know that this was going to turn into an international success?
No, definitely none of the above. It was, as most things are, or as a lot of things are, it was complete happenstance. Again, I knew Lewis and Nick, and to some extent Roland, from hanging out at their offices, some being friendly competitors, whatnot. So I believe it was the second year of South by Southwest, and they called me up about 10 days before the event was set to begin, and I always remember the phone call. It was like, we're wondering if we could transfer our whole database to a computer. Well, sure, that's what computers are for. And then there was a little bit of pause, and they said, well, how about your computer? So the reason I was hired at South by Southwest was not because of any great skill or aptitude I had. It was because I had a Mac Plus, and they had a typesetting machine. At that point, before the Mac Plus, their whole database was on this old typesetting machine, which would fill about that room over there. Just huge machine, and certainly not very conducive to what they needed a database for, or portability, or that type of thing. So we spent about 60 hours straight taking shifts and typing this whole database, which was pretty small at that point, into this reflex database on a Mac Plus. If you remember Mac
The
Pluses?
good old days.
Yeah. And we finished 2 hours before the second event was supposed to start. I was like, okay, this is all you have to do. It's all set up. It'll be fine. I have to go to my day job now, and I'll stop by at lunch to see how it's going. So this was back when South by Southwest, the headquarters were where the Radisson is now, which at that point was the Crest. And I remember at that point I'd gone from delivering newspapers at night to delivering, doing pharmaceutical deliveries for the Hyde Park Pharmacy, and I had a 30-minute lunch break, and I decided to drive over to the Crest to see how it was going. And I pulled in the parking lot, and there's this line out the door. Much I think there's a line out the door at South by Southwest now, and there was smoke coming out of the top of the one Mac Plus, and the whole thing was a complete disaster. But somehow that impressed the powers that be at South by Southwest, so that I was hired as the first full-time employee. More importantly, again, my Mac Plus and my old huge laser writer were also hired. And from that as well, I became, because I had the Mac Plus, I became known as the tech person, which is, again, my tech expertise ended at about the Mac Plus. So I've been able to pull that disguise off for quite a while, I guess.
I had a Mac Plus in college.
They were fine machines.
They were. It got me through. So you started then as basically then on sort of the administrative side, were you managing more getting the accent at this point? Is it just the music side, or are you managing the registrations?
Yeah, I once I started working full-time at South by Southwest, I was working on the registration end of things. And again, I mean, for several years, we existed off that one Mac Plus, which seems completely hard to believe at this point, but it was a very small operation. We had a Mac Plus and a fax machine and a couple of telephone lines, and that was the extent of our operation. I ended up quitting for a little while, or kind of reducing my role, so to speak, in the 90s, and went to work on a newspaper called the Texas Sports Chronicle. This was being published out of Westlake. I was working with Jeff Ward, who's now at KLBJ, on that. This was a monthly sports publication. It was a pretty good idea, but we were publishing at a time when UT football was really bad. And as we all know, when UT football is bad, that is a detriment to the local economy, and it really hindered the growth of this paper. So this thing eventually went out of business after a couple of years, and I put my tail between my legs and went back to South by Southwest for even more punishment.
I'm just still trying to imagine running South by Southwest on one computer.
We were a much smaller event.
So how many people were attending at that point? It was
at that point, through 1994, it was a music-only event.
Right.
I would say for the first couple of years, there would generously be 1,000 people at the thing. I think the first year there were 100 bands. So much smaller. And it wasn't until the mid-90s where the number of bands began to increase, and that really started some of the initial growth spurts of the event.
So how did you guys decide then to expand to film, which is walking my way to interactive?
Sure.
But
again, South by Southwest is their the three senior directors are Lewis Black, Nick Barbaro, and Roland Swenson. Lewis and Nick are the editor and publisher of the Austin Chronicle, respectively. And if you know Lewis and Nick, they always wanted to be movie producers. They were at the RTF program at UT. They taught various film things. They're very involved with the film scene in Austin. So as much as this burgeoning music event was fun, they always wanted to do something with film. And I think at one point the South by Southwest film event was the idea was it would be combined with what is now the Austin Film Festival, which is in the fall, and then that partnership kind of fell apart. So in 1994, when the film event was launched, it was South by Southwest Film and Multimedia. So it was a combined event, mainly film and a little bit of multimedia. The multimedia at that point was mainly CD-ROMs. Earlier this week, we were doing looking back on the history, and it looks like in that first year we had 8 panels and 36 total speakers. So those were the days.
Those were a little different than Hugh told me. They had 3,200 submissions for panels for interactive for this year. So that's
a few more than 8.
Yeah, it's really grown. So and I bring up this idea of launching film because, I mean, in a lot of ways, South by Southwest, maybe not necessarily a technology startup per se, but it really was a startup based in Austin, and this idea of, how do you decide when and to launch a new product or a new version of a product. And it seems like the film was successful enough that it stayed part of the organization, but how did you decide then to take that multimedia part and really grow it into its own component?
Well, the first year, 1994, when we did this new event, we were way far ahead of our time in thinking that the film people would mix with the multimedia people, but that really wasn't the case. In whatever events we did, we saw that the film people stayed on one side of the room and the multimedia people stayed on the other side of the room. Little did anyone know that YouTube would come 15 years later and change everything. We decided that after that it just made more sense to split this up into 2 events. So at that point there was South by Southwest Music, South by Southwest Film, South by Southwest Multimedia. And were film and multimedia successful? Not really. I mean, multimedia, we had many, many, many lean years where if the event had to survive on its own, it would not have survived. The reason it survived was that there was this big behemoth, South by Southwest Music, that was generating enough revenue to support the small event. And, I never had any vision or it struggled for long enough that I never saw that there was going to be a light at the end of this tunnel. I thought we were always going to struggle. I think if there's a corollary here for the group, it's don't quit your day job, because you need something to support what you're doing while you're in that valley of death, or however you want to phrase it, where you just don't know what you're doing yet. And it took us 12 years, 15 years before we figured out what we were doing on the interactive side. If we were smarter, if my expertise extended beyond the Mac Plus, we could have probably figured it out sooner, or had a better idea sooner. But again, we had the luxury of being within this organization that on the music side was doing pretty well and supported what expenses we had on the multimedia and then interactive side.
And it's certainly, it's interesting to hear that, because now if you look at official attendees, and I know that there's some discrepancy, the music festival still attracts a lot of people to individual shows that maybe aren't signed up for the whole thing. But interactive's now by far the largest attendee base. It's launched household names, Foursquare, Twitter, really took off at South by Southwest, and now in the industry it's considered the place to go and see new tech companies and see, especially in the social, as social media has become a bigger and bigger part of the technology that's available. South by Southwest has really supported those organizations. But I mean, when did you sort of know you had gotten to the right spot, or have you still sort of feel like you're working through that?
Thank you for the nice words, Andy. We given where we are in September, makes us all think of this. I mean, we certainly at South by Southwest across the board had a very rough time in the years immediately after 9/11. People weren't traveling. The dot-com boom had come and gone to the dot-com bust. It was a very difficult time period. We laid off a lot of people at South by Southwest. We had voluntary, not so voluntary pay cuts all across the board. And so that was a pretty scary time. And this was still within the time frame that we weren't really growing on the interactive side. I think we first started to see some very positive growth on interactive around 2004, 2005. Really, that was when we started doing the panel picker stuff, which helped, but it was just this whole beginning of the social media revolution. And again, just looking back at some of the stuff, when I was looking back at some of the stuff earlier this week, I think our keynote in 2004, 2005 was Jonathan Abrams from Friendster. If we can all remember Friendster, which was the precursor way back then, he turned out to be pretty much a jerk, and I remember his keynote offended a lot of people, particularly a lot of women in the audience, and for better or for worse, whether there was any direct correlation, Friendster began to do its slow nosedive shortly after that talk. And I mean, who knows if there was any kind of correlation. There are a lot of opinion makers, thought leaders who come to South by Southwest, and I imagine that they told their friends that this guy's a jerk and why should we be aligned with him. But again, we started doing the panel picker. The panel picker, for people who may not know, it's a way that we generate panel ideas by mining ideas from the community. This was an idea that, of course, we had remixed from someone else, which was Threadless, the online t-shirt company in Chicago. We had done a promotion with Threadless, and we had done, we'd always done promotions, various kinds of promotions. Send your email in for a free registration. We get 20 emails in or 30 emails in, and just felt like you're kind of shouting into an empty room and no one's hearing. We did this promotion with Threadless about design a South by Southwest t-shirt, and there were 700 entries. It's like, wow, what is this? And just thinking, well, is there a way to take that same kind of idea with Threadless, where the community designs, the idea that Threadless has, the community designs t-shirt ideas, they show them on an online interface, people vote on them, the designs that get the highest votes are then manufactured into a shirt. So it's a great way to communicate with your audience or build a new audience. And again, thought, is there a way to do that with what our main product is, which is panel content? And so we designed this, or put together this interface that asked people to submit ideas, and then those ideas people voted on. The interface grew slightly less clunky every year. It still has some clunkiness to it, but is fairly functional. And the first year we had this interface, we got 600 ideas, and that was allowing people could submit a up to 3 ideas each. Then next year we changed that. You could do 2 ideas, and then eventually 1 idea. And every year since we've launched this thing, we've got 500 to 700 more ideas. So again, it's been this great way to get great ideas from the community, communicate better with the community, let people in the community who are real experts in their field do more of the panel programming, create buzz about South by Southwest in August when there typically wasn't buzz before. And I wish I could say that I completely understood how this was all going to play out back in 2005 when we're putting this interface together. I had no idea it would be so successful, but it was. And then we've had in terms of our growth. I mean, we were lucky enough to have Twitter launch at the 2007 event, and that has been another huge thing in our huge event in the progression and growth of the event. We were able to get Mark Zuckerberg as the keynote in 2008, although that keynote was a horrible disaster. It nonetheless.
He also has gotten better.
He's gotten better, I hear. Stock went up when he talked, or day before yesterday. The keynote was a horrible disaster, but focused a lot of attention on the event. It's been a crazy ride and a fun ride the last few years. For those of you who have startups that have begun to take off, it's like what are we doing differently now than we didn't do before? It's we tried so hard to make it grow for so many years. We literally could not pay people to come in the door, and now it's all of a sudden kaboom. So that's a fun experience, although it certainly has lots and lots of challenges.
So when you guys breathe again, I suppose sometime probably in April after South by Southwest, what kind of, and a lot of software you're able to iterate very quickly. You can put something out, you can get feedback, you can change it in the next week. You guys don't really have that luxury because you sort of just have this annual event. But how do you go about looking at and deciding, all right, like the panel picker idea, okay, that one worked. Let's keep that. How can we make it better? What do we need to change? Where do you get that feedback from primarily?
Well, that's a great question. I mean, having done the event enough times, and I understand that there is this arc that happens during and after the event, meaning that when the event's happening and if everything is relatively going well, if the problems are relatively contained, which usually they are, you typically have lots of people come up and say, I had a great time this year, made new connections, it was wonderful, and that's very addictive. You're on top of the world. You're like, wow, this is so great. I'm so excited. We did all this great stuff this year. and then how it happens is we send out feedback. We start to read that feedback beginning 2 weeks later, 3 weeks later, 4 weeks later. And the feedback is where you really find out what happened to the event. So you go from this incredible high to reading all these complaints, which takes you to this kind of incredible low like a month later. Like, I thought it was good, and now I realize that it wasn't good at all. There were so many problems that we thought we had fixed that we didn't have fixed. But, our feedback system is relatively prehistoric. It's mainly emailed surveys. Nonetheless, it is a valuable way to understand more of the user experience. We've certainly found that the people who are most likely to give feedback are the people who had problems. And it's also, there's a high correlation with the number of years someone has attended and the likelihood that they're going to give feedback. The first year attendees tend to give more feedback than people who've been there more often, and I don't know quite why that is. If people have been there more often realize that, I wrote them 3 years in a row, they never listened to what I said, I'm not going to do it now. But we take the feedback very seriously. We have an assignment that my staff hates me for doing this, but they have to email back. Each person's assigned X amount of the feedback responses to read, and they have to email 30 people, and 10 of them have to be people who are really pissed off and annoyed. And, usually when that happens, the person is very surprised that someone actually read their email. And often that, it's this Gary Vee concept of turning your worst detractors into your biggest supporters. So like, wow, someone actually listened to me and said that this is agreed that my problem was worthwhile. And so I think that's been a way to, create even more momentum in the event. One of the sayings that I am very attached to is this idea from the Clue Train Manifesto from 12 years ago that markets are conversations, and the more that we can communicate with our audience, whether it's on more sophisticated methods with social media or Twitter or whatever, or whether it's email or phone conversations or whatnot, the more community advocates that we can create that do the heavy lifting of word of mouth publicity, which helps the event grow.
I love that idea of writing 10 people who are really, really pissed off with you. I'm sure that does.
You love it when it's done. You don't like doing it at a time. I can tell you that much.
I can imagine that. So what keeps you going? I mean, this has been, you've talked about over a decade now of experience doing this, and clearly have grown it to be something very successful. But how do you get up the energy each year to think about, okay, I'm going to go in and I'm going to do this again? It seems like it's exhausting to attend South by Southwest. I can't imagine running it.
Well, again, doing the event and having positive feedback is, it's very intoxicating. We all like positive feedback in whatever we do, and I think South by Southwest, planning an event like that must be like planning a campaign or doing performance or whatever. Your whole year is geared towards this 1 week, and if it goes well, which it generally does, sometimes because of things we've done, sometimes because of other things, again, we get lots of good feedback, and that's really nice to have. In terms of what keeps you going afterwards, is again, it's like every year we think like, oh, we finally nailed it. We figured out all those problems, and then afterwards you realize, no, we didn't figure out those problems, and there's this desire to like, okay, we'll do it one more time so we can get this stuff right. But it's like every time you fix one thing, then 3 more things need fixing over here. But in the end, I very much enjoy working with this very, very creative, energetic, innovative community. I think that they are they are absolutely the real stars of what has made South by Southwest a relevant or important event. I mean, we just kind of set the table and sit back and watch, but all these innovative, creative, energetic people coming to what is a very innovative, creative city in what is generally the best month of the year.
Last year, perhaps, except from that.
We had a little rain. We didn't quite perfect that weather technology, but that's a lot of fun.
All right, so I'm going to ask you one more question, and then I'm going to open it up. So be thinking about what you would like to ask him about. And mine is, thinking about looking at 2013, how can startups best plan to engage or be involved in South by Southwest in a way that is going to be successful for them?
Well, that's a good question. That's a great question. The blessing and the curse of South by Southwest at this point is that it's gotten, we've been lucky enough to grow a lot over the last few years. And, when you consider 2007 when Twitter launched, we were at that point significantly smaller than where we are now. All of the action took place on one hallway of the Austin Convention Center. What Twitter did to gain attention was they worked a promotion with us where they had bought 2 fairly large screen TVs that were mounted in the hallways, and so everyone walking by could see the Twitter feed going on. And at that point, no one knew what Twitter was, but it was a big enough display that it's like, wow, this is kind of interesting, and you could begin to see the possibilities of what this might be. Although in 2007, who knew what Twitter was going to eventually evolve to and where it may still go? But again, the event was so much smaller then. It was easy for one company with a relatively small budget to pretty much capture this entire crowd. Meanwhile, by 2012 and 2013, we are in 10 different campuses, i.e. hotels in the downtown area. We've got numerous startups launching, numerous startups that launched the week before. We've got all sorts of press people. We've got all sorts of parties going on every day. So it is certainly harder for any one company to create that single experience or get through to as many people as Twitter did. Which is all a long way to say, that's a really hard question you have. I do think that, the most basic answer to this is it's that much more important to have a game plan before the event. If you're a startup, know what kinds of people you want to meet, know exactly who you want to meet, where this person's going to be. Try to set up meetings beforehand. Try to think of the panels that you want to go to where you can meet the kind of people you want to meet, or the meetups. Or if you're trying to get value out of South by Southwest without a badge, where you can go that you will be able to meet the kind of people you want to meet. I think that having a plan and being open to serendipity of you're planning to go to the Salt Lick with Robert Scoble, but you're in the line to get a taxi, and all of a sudden Kevin Rose walks by. You should talk to Kevin Rose as he walks by. But having a plan and being open to serendipity is much better than thinking that it's all going to happen serendipitously without a plan, because it's just too big an event at this point. There's too much going on, and it's too easy to get lost. We have, the party line, which I'm good at spouting, is there's lots of ways to work with South by Southwest in terms of marketing to create opportunities where your startup can get noticed, and fully supportive of everyone who wants to work with South by Southwest on that. But ultimately, the bottom line on all this stuff is having some kind of product or service or company that has value that the people at South by Southwest are interested in. The people who come to this event are very smart. They're very good at finding the most innovative stuff. They're very good at sniffing out what isn't innovative and what is just marketing BS. And so remember that.
Excellent. All right, it's your turn now. How many people here have been to South by Southwest Interactive before? Ooh, very good. Someone has, okay.
Yeah, well, first of all, I think you are the most successful person on the planet in a highly visible position. And I have no idea how you do it. You hear, no matter what you do, you have to stop by. You either hear from you or one of his people, like almost within the day, if not within a couple of hours. And I have never, you don't even know me, but I have never not gotten a response from you about anything. And most of the time I'm not the first time it was kind of a rant, and you ran it back in the same camp and said, "I'm really sorry. I saw it coming. I couldn't prevent it. Forgive us." So kind of like Father, forgive them. They know not what they did. So I want to know, how do you guys vet the keynotes? Because that's been my only major disappointment with Southline, is how many people get on the stage where we walk out literally within 10 or 15 minutes and going down the hall. Because you do everything else so really well. It's like, how is that the Achilles heel? It's kind of important.
Well, that's a good question. I think the keynotes are some of the high-profile disasters or problems we've had there could have been prevented with more advanced work with the keynotes. And that's certainly something that we have rededicated ourselves to over the last few years. We've traditionally kind of taken a laissez-faire attitude on this. That the person's a keynote, they'll prepare, and on too many occasions we've found that they didn't prepare.
Did they have to do anything? Like I know with the when you or your panels or your presentations in the running, I love that we get so much advance notice about that, and we get a chance to recompete without being eliminated. Do you put the keynotes through anything like that?
Were there PR people?
What?
Were there PR people? I mean, like with Mark and with Sarah Lacey interview and whatnot. I was kind of surprised to amplify your question that their PR people weren't somehow pulling them aside and saying, "This is important.
Yeah.
You should think about what's
Who
fixing to
handles
happen."
it, for gosh sake?
Because
I mean, don't
Mark
they
was
handle it?
Mark was funded at that point, wasn't he? I mean, he was.
Yeah, but I mean,
He was very young.
well, 2 points here. Let me first address. I think bottom line is we need to do more work in preparing the keynotes. I do think that our friends at TED have set the bar really, really high on these on these talks. And one example of that was 3 years ago, we had Moot from 4chan doing the keynote. Who Moot was 20, 21, 19, 20 or something at that time. I had watched his TED video, repeatedly, and it's like, this guy is great. He is so much better than Mark Zuckerberg was. He's going to be great. He is eloquent. He's got this very different take on privacy and security, and this will be perfect for our crowd. Well, the problem was that TED had worked like crazy with him. When he came to South by Southwest, he decided that he would rewrite his keynote 10 minutes before he went on stage. He locked himself in his room and wouldn't come out on stage. And so we finally dragged him out there at about 2:20 when the thing was supposed to start at 2 o'clock. So that was one more reminder that what TED does is really good, and maybe the TED videos are sometimes misleading in that regard. In terms of the Mark Zuckerberg and Sarah Lacey stuff, I think at that point Mark was just, or Zuckerberg was just much less experienced as a speaker, and in some ways, given how bad Sarah Lacey was and how she came across as flirty and whatnot, it to some degree hid his failings. But I remember seeing him right before he went on stage, and he was, look up Wikipedia for deer in the headlights. That was him. He was, not looking good. But in this weird way that keynote was this great experience, demonstration of the power of a connected audience, in the sense that previously you would have been sitting here saying, God, this Hugh Forrest guy, he's boring, why am I sitting here, whatever. With that keynote, everyone started tweeting each other and was like, he's boring, yeah, he's horrible, I'm leaving right now. And all of a sudden everyone knew what they were what was going on, and everyone left en masse, and it was this,
like it was really amazing.
Yeah,
you would never see it anywhere else on the planet that happened.
Yeah.
There were cartoons within half an hour. I didn't see the keynote. I saw the cartoons in the Twitter, and so they were all over the little tables out there, and I was like, "What the heck just happened here?" And then it goes all over. It was quite something, quite a phenomenon.
Y'all are marvelous with how you handle it, though, and you are upfront. You're very forgiving. So within that term, we do. It didn't have anything to do with what you did.
Well, and the other point there, or just to take that a step further, is that I believe that keynote was on a Monday. Our Tuesday keynote that year was, that keynote, horrible. We're all freaking out. How can we pull this all back together? And then the Tuesday keynote that year was Frank Warren of Post Secret, who I had seen at Book People 6 months earlier. I'd never seen so many people for a book reading before, and I told my staff, we've got to get this guy. You won't believe how he can move an audience. And sure enough, whereas the day before everyone was like pissed off that this Mark Zuckerberg guy was so bad, with the Frank Warren thing, the audience is crying halfway through the keynote, and then it ends up with someone comes over to me. This is Nick Fink comes over to me and says, "Hey, my buddy wants to propose to his girlfriend for the first question in the Q&A." So it goes from yesterday's keynote where everyone's walking out to the first question in the keynote, the Q&A for the next keynote, where guy gets, Frank Warren says, "Hey, you want the microphone?" And he asks his girlfriend to marry him, and she says yes. So how can you beat that for drama and dramatic arc? Not that we planned any of it, it just kind of happened that way.
Well, I didn't see that keynote, but when you Google South by Southwest, it's still something that's right up there at the top. And so maybe, there really is no bad, yes, it clearly was not anybody's finest performance, but, it's still, people are coming, it makes them come to check out the next one, right? He's sort of the standard by which they're all judged now.
Yeah, and Facebook knew it was a disaster. They hastily scheduled a developers meetup the next day at one of the clubs downtown where they showcased Mark in a much better light. So, again, I wish that you could say that the Mark Zuckerberg keynote was the finest ever and he gave all these great insights about social media. He didn't, but somehow we survived that.
And they're still doing okay.
Well, maybe not.
I think the TED tickets are $7,000 a piece, so that kind of sets their expectations as well. Yeah, we're going to Long Beach.
But you can get them for free online, so.
But speaking of TED, I noticed that there's a lot of cameras and recording equipment in most of the sessions. I can't make it to all the sessions that I want to go to. What do y'all do with all that content?
That's another great question, Michael. That content lives in a
Mac Plus.
Yes, absolutely. It's certainly something that we have to get better at in terms of broadcasting this content live, rebroadcasting it later, if for no other reason that, in many ways the growth of the event has really maxed out the infrastructure of Austin at this point, and there are more people who want to come down but can't find hotel rooms, can't get flights, whatnot, and if we could have more of the content online for people to enjoy and benefit from, that would be great. Now, I don't think the online experience, whether it's South by Southwest or TED or whatnot, is quite the same as meeting face-to-face, but
I would agree.
it's something that we need to improve on a lot.
Okay, I'm going to go with the woman in the back and then come to you.
Yeah, because I attended and I never received an email since March about when those podcasts would actually be available. So
There are, email me and I'll point you to the secret location. There are audio podcasts up there. They're hard to find. The video stuff is even harder to find, but I'll give you my business card.
could I make a proposal that you just have a South by Southwest channel I can subscribe to so I can get the podcast?
That is, yes, you can make that proposal. And, that has been proposed many times, but we've not yet reached the tipping point on that.
Okay.
Alright, so we've seen a lot of launches, and with like the lean startup kind of methodology, The common wisdom is to just kind of get your product out there early and just iterate kind of linearly. What do you think is like the latest that you can launch and it's still acceptable to call it a launch? And what do you think about the importance of launching versus getting the product out in the early?
Are you asking in specific relation to the South by Southwest cycle, or?
I think South by Southwest is a great place to do it, but I think you probably have the visibility to the art of launching in general, right? So
Yeah.
just kind of when do you think is a good time to launch a company? To have a launch event, and at what point do you think it's maybe like too late to really call it a launch event?
Well, to the story I told earlier, I think that being able to get to launch some kind of minimum viable product and have it out there and just survive for as long as you can until you really figure out what you are is hugely important. It is again, that was the luxury we had with the multimedia event and interactive. It just from a South by Southwest organizational standpoint, I don't know that we have that luxury with some of the newer events we've launched. For instance, we've got a eco event that's coming up in a couple weeks at the Hilton, and just given how much buzz we've created on these events, I think people expect more with what we're doing now. And again, there's not that ability to lay as low as we have before. But again, I mean, speaking only from my experience, or speaking mostly from my experience within South by Southwest, we were a very small part of the company for a long while. We made every mistake possible 2 or 3 times, but gradually we got better, and finally we figured out our voice. And so, that I think fits in a lot with the Lean Startup Eric Ries philosophy. In terms of launching or not launching at South by Southwest, the beauty of South by Southwest again is that there's lots of decision makers, thought leaders, early adopters here, and if you can get that, it's a good way to get your product, service, company directly to those people. The curse of South by Southwest is that there are a lot of companies trying to do the same thing, and there's a lot of people to wade through to try to get to the right people now.
Any other?
I stumped the crowd.
Any other questions?
Do you get to attend any events at South by, or is it like exclusively work 24/8?
It's not exclusively work. I mean, when I talk to people at South by Southwest, they often say, "God, you must be so busy now." And I'm just like, it's really not that busy now. I mean, the busyness was from July to March. At this point, the event is running on its own. There are some things that we can tweak and change and problem solve, but generally it's kind of on its own. So in terms of what we do or I do or other people on staff, I mean, I typically go in to see a panel for 5 minutes or something, and often wish I could stay longer, but then go to the next room, see how it's going, or just do little bits of things. I think that there's always some degree of frustration that I really want to see that longer, but at the same time, again, as an organizer, whether it's South by Southwest or some other event, I think you feed off the energy of the people there, and if people seem like they're having a good time, getting stuff out of it, generally enjoying themselves, there's a kind of a high that comes with that, and that's generally satisfying. I think we've talked a lot about the Mark Zuckerberg fiasco from years back. Certainly one of our other biggest problems or Achilles heel or weaknesses was this past year with the huge line for registration. and this being huge, I mean, on Friday of Interactive, people were waiting in line for 2 or 3 hours. Some people say longer. I'm not sure if that's accurate. The problem we had there, or I don't want to deflect any responsibility. It's something that we've got to improve on. At the same time, that it was the literal perfect storm because the weather was so bad. It forced everyone inside at one point at the same time to register, and kind of exposed how problematic it is if everyone tries to register at the same time. I think that one of the reasons that South by Southwest has grown and thrived and prospered and that people like coming here is that we've been blessed with really great weather in March the last 5 or 10 years. And people, you can't underestimate how important that is. People are coming from Austin, from, East Coast where it's cold, West Coast where it may still be cold, and they can come here and enjoy the nice weather and, go outside and eat at a nice restaurant downtown. And that's a big part of the experience. But again, last year when we had this torrential rain pour, everyone came inside and was really,
It did get better.
Well, it couldn't have gotten worse, could it?
But it was only really bad on Friday.
The UK felt right at home, so somebody.
Yes, that's a good spin. We were doing it to make them.
The global.
Yeah.
I'm hearing a lot about the event, right? Just a lot about the South by Southwest event. I hear a lot of pitch about that. What I'm having trouble putting together is, as a company, you spoke that you guys have made a lot of mistakes. And I'm just curiously wondering, and really wondering at this point, outside of the event, as a company, South by Southwest, what are you guys doing to maybe give back to the entrepreneurial community? Are you educating on those mistakes that you've made? Are you feeding into startups directly? And like I said, the reason why I'm so curious is because I hear a lot about the event. So I'm just wondering what you guys are doing the other 360 days.
Well, for better or for worse, we begin our planning for the next year pretty much in April. So, I wish there was another 364 days of the year or whatnot. And this is generally a feature. My experience is that the sooner you can start the buzz for an event, the more buzz that you can create for the event. So that's all. That's just a way to say that I would love to be able to talk more about our experiences to startups and others, but we just are somewhat limited on bandwidth there. I've been fortunate enough to be invited to speak at more events such as this, whether it be in Austin or other cities, and that's in many ways our best way to communicate what we've done, how we've succeeded, how we've failed, how we try to move forward on that. But again, I think that this is not quite answering your question, but very much a believer in again this concept of markets or conversations. The more we can communicate with our audience, whether it's basic informational issues, trying to do that, or whether it is lessons that we've learned or problems that people have experienced in the event and trying to improve upon that. The strength of South by Southwest is the community, whether it's this Austin community that's very creative and innovative, or whether it's this virtual community that often comes together in Austin. That's the real strength of the event. And South by Southwest has really grown when we've learned to better kind of let that community pull us as opposed to us trying to push it one way or another. So again, I don't think I have a really great answer
To your question, I'd love to have a more formal way to communicate some of what we have learned and haven't learned, but with bandwidth limitations, we haven't done as much as we probably should.